So hey guys, welcome to the Advanced Web Development Workshop. And in this workshop, we'll be talking about HTML, Canvas, and JavaScript. So now before we begin with the contents of the workshop, let's state some assumptions that we're making for this workshop. Because this is an advanced workshop, we're assuming that you already know some HTML and CSS, and you know a decent amount of JavaScript. It doesn't have to be much. Or you may know some other coding languages, because just having that experience is really going to help you understand what we're doing in this workshop. And you are here because you want to learn more about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and web dev in general, and you're just really curious to know that. But don't be discouraged if you don't know anything about JavaScript yet. We're here to learn, so make sure you stick around. And by watching this workshop, you will pick up a thing or two. So just don't miss out. Okay, so getting into the workshop, what is HTML Canvas? So HTML Canvas is an HTML element that allows you to draw on the fly with JavaScript. And because of this, it's really easy to add dynamic or procedurally generated graphics, and this allows for so many possibilities. And here are some examples for things that I have built in the past, and this may serve as an inspiration for the upcoming Advanced Web Dev Challenge. So let's just take a look. Okay, so first of all, we have this. This is kind of just an ideal gas simulator that I built with HTML Canvas. And you can see that it already adds a lot of functionalities. So it just generates these particles, and using the HTML Canvas, it's able to draw it onto this board. And you can see the particles just moving about, and that's pretty cool. And another example that I would like to show is this really cool effect where it's like, if you've watched The Matrix, you might recognize this. So basically what it does is that it just draws these string of numbers onto a canvas, and using JavaScript, it calculates the color and the opacity of that text, and it makes for this really cool effect. And the last thing I would like to show, if you watched the beginner workshop, you may have seen this, is the personal site that I made for myself. And by using the HTML canvas, I'm able to procedurally generate these clouds that you see here. So every time I reload, these clouds are going to be a different position, and they're just going to start coming endlessly and endlessly. So that's just a really cool thing that you can involve into your normal web dev adventures. Okay, now I keep saying HTML, and that might sound a bit scary because this is a JavaScript workshop, and HTML Canvas doesn't sound very JavaScript heavy, but it really is. The only thing HTML about it is the canvas itself, and everything else from drawing, erasing, and choosing colors is all JavaScript. Okay, so let's just go into VS Code here so I can show you some examples. So let's just create a file called index.html, and this will just be where we're writing our code. I'm just going to start this with an abbreviation. So of course the first thing you're going to have to do is add the canvas element to your HTML. And just to make this, a little more noticeable, we're going to give it a style with a border, 1px solid black, just so you can see the canvas a little better. Okay, that took me a bit of time, but I just pulled up the file that we were making, and you can see that the HTML canvas is here and is just outlined with kind of a little black box. And this will serve as our element here. So now that we have the canvas, we can connect it to JavaScript. I'm just going to write all my JavaScript in the script tag here, but it's okay if you want to use an external JavaScript file and just link it to this HTML. But here, the way we're going to do this is we're going to do const canvas equals document.getElementById, And let's just give this canvas an ID of canvas. And that's just going to fetch the canvas element from the HTML. And the most important part is we're going to do const ctx, which is going to help us define the context of the canvas. And this is basically where we'll be doing all our drawing, etc. So what we can do is canvas.getContext. And here we can just write 2D. Okay, so now that we have our canvas linked to our JavaScript, we can get started. So the most basic thing you'll be doing is you'll be drawing a line. And we begin that by ctx.beginPath. Now this is just a really handy thing that you should do, because if you don't do this, sometimes your program is going to think that you're drawing something but you're not finished yet, and it'll have this weird lines connecting all the things that you've drawn. So make sure you add ctx begin path. And just to draw a line, we're just going to do ctx.move2. And that's basically going to tell you where it's going to begin that path. And for this, we'll just write 0, 0. And then we can write ctx.line2. So basically that's just going to extend that point into a line. And here we can write 100, 100. And that's just basically that's just what the computer understands. And for us to actually see what's going on, we have to do ctx.stroke. And just as a reminder, you don't actually have to do ctx. It's basically whatever you named your variable here with the canvas get context. So let's save our file and we can reload this page. That's interesting. Oh, that is supposed to be a small o. Yep, and you see that here the line is drawn. And I'm just going to take a quick moment to explain how the canvas works. So you can see that the line starts from the top left, and that's where 0, 0 is going to be. And the width and height of the canvas will be defined in the canvas element itself. So we can do width equals 500. And we do the same thing for height. And basically, that's just going to be where the width and height is defined. And of course, you can also set this using JavaScript. I'm not going to go into it here, but it's only a quick Google search away. So if you're curious, make sure you check that out as well. And I would just like to emphasize that setting the width and the height in the element itself is not the same as setting the width and the height with the CSS properties. Because the width and the height here, what it determines is the dimensions of the content of the drawing. And if you use CSS to change the width and the height, it may actually distort your canvas, and you probably don't want that. So just make sure you set it here or using JavaScript. Okay, so that's a line. And another thing that may come in handy for you is drawing a circle. So for this one, we're going to go to the same thing. We're going to do context.beginPath, except here we're going to do ctx.arc. So if you didn't know what an arc is basically just part of a circle. And this is going to take in certain properties. So the first property is going to take in is x and y. This is basically the position of the circle, of the center of the circle on the canvas element. So here let's just do 100, 100. And the next thing that you're going to define is the radius, or basically how big the circle is. And here let's just do, I don't know, like 25 units. And the start angle is basically going to be, say, 0. And if you want this to draw a full circle, you can just set this to 2 times math.pi. And if you didn't know, 2 pi is just 360 in radians. So basically, that's going to help you draw a full circle. And we just reload this and check this out, and now we have a circle here. And of course, this doesn't have to be 2 pi. You can make this like 3, but that won't draw the entire circle. But this still has some pretty cool uses, so just use your imagination and create things. And now you may be looking at this circle. Now it's a circle. And thinking to yourself, wait, that's just an outline of a circle. I don't want that. I want it to be filled in. Now that is also possible with HTML canvas. Instead of stroke, you just do context.fill. And bam, that's going to fill in the circle for you. And now, right now, the circle is black. I don't want it to be black. I want it to be red. At least I want the, the outline to be red. So we can just do stroke here again. And we do context.stroke style. And set that equal to red. And basically what that's going to do is give a red outline to your circle. And the same can be done with fill. So say I want the fill to be blue. We can just do fill style equals to blue. And instead of stroke, we write fill here. And then that will basically give you a blue circle. And there's also other possibilities that you can do with other things that you can do with the HTML canvas. For instance, you can actually write on the HTML canvas. So what we're going to do is ctx.font equals, let's just say 20 pixels, which is the size of your text, and Arial, which is the family of the font. Instead of ctx.fill, we do ctx.fill text. And basically, we're just going to write the message, say we want to write hello world. And again, we're going to write in the coordinates, so say 100, 100. And that's going to write hello world here. So just as a reminder, this is 0, 0, which is the top left. And this is basically the end of the width and height of your canvas at the bottom right. And as you may expect, you can also do ctx.stroke. No, that's not stroke. Stroke text. And that will basically give you a similar functionality, except we'll just draw the outline of the text, which is pretty cool in my opinion. And another thing that you may want to do is you may want to clear the canvas. So here we can just do ctx.clearRect, which is basically a clear rectangle. And we insert the starting coordinates, which will be 0, 0. And say we want to clear the entire screen or the entire canvas. So we just do canvas.width and canvas.height. And basically that's going to draw it and then erase whatever you just wrote. So even though we still have the code for the text, it has been erased. And there's also a lot of other things that you can set with HTML Canvas. For instance, you can set the opacity of what you're drawing with global alpha. You can set the size of what you're drawing with global scale. And it's also possible to do gradients and the like, but we won't go into too much detail here because this is a JavaScript workshop, not an HTML graphics workshop, sadly. So if you want to learn more, definitely check out W3 Schools, which has some pretty good resources for just, general searching as well as learning HTML Canvas. Okay, so now you're thinking, since I know how to, draw all these things onto the HTML Canvas, what can I really do with this? So right now, we're just going to, build a really simple game just to show you the capabilities of HTML Canvas. So the premise here is we're basically going to be using the canvas as the quote-unquote arena with the width and height as the coordinate system. And the character is going to be represented by a circle. And it's basically just going to, you can walk around by changing the dimension, the location of where the character is and just redrawing it all the time. And we're obviously also going to make some projectiles, some enemies. And this is really just to show you what you can do with the canvas and JavaScript together. Okay, so let's start off with this. So, for instance, we want a player, and we're just going to define that as an object. So an object is JavaScript is very similar to, say, a dictionary in Python. We're just going to give it the X position, set it to 250, which is dead center of this canvas at least. Let's give it a similar Y, 250. And then we can also give it, say, health, 3 lives. Ah, wait, that is supposed to be a comma. And speed. Now we may not be using some of this during the workshop, but it's for you to expand upon later on. And we're also just going to define a class here called enemy, just so we can more dynamically generate enemies later on. And if you don't know how to use JavaScript classes, basically what you have to do is add a constructor. And this constructor is going to take in some props. And we can just use, say, this dot x equals x. So we're going to pass in x, y, speed for the enemy as well. And just to, set it by default, that's going to be 1, and health by default is going to be 3. And just to define these things, you're just going to use this dot, which is very crucial for classes in JavaScript. Dot y equals y. So basically, whenever you want to pull from when you want to use a property that is defined within that class, you're gonna have to use this. So just set up all this stuff. Okay. And one last thing we want for this game is, just make a projectile. And here we're just going to call it an arrow. And this constructor is also going to take in some properties like x, y, as well as the direction of where the arrow is heading. Just copy this over here. So this direction equals the direction that we pass it. And we're also just going to give it a velocity, just to make sure that we know how fast the arrow is traveling, and we don't need to repeatedly calculate it. And math.cosine. So this is trigonometry. If you don't know it, it's a math concept. That's fine. For now, you can just kind of use it. And if you're curious as to what this does, it basically just breaks down an angle into the x and y components. And similarly, we're just going to do the same thing here, except with sine, which breaks it down into the y component. Cosine is for the x component, times 5. And we don't want our arrow to be there forever. We want it to delete itself after a few seconds, because it's not going to stay on the screen forever. So we're just going to give it a time left. Just set that to 120. Okay, and that's this for now. So one of the things that we might be interested in is just being able to draw our character. So here we're going to use a cent interval, and that's going to take in a function as one of the props, as well as how long does it wait until it repeats again. Here we'll use 10, which is basically 100th of a second. And what we're going to do here is just to first of all clear the canvas because we don't want anything left. behind from the last time we drew on it. Oh, I just did not define the canvas. I accidentally deleted it. Whoops. Okay, so now we're done with that. So we just want to clear. Oh, you need the const here, or else it's not going to work. Or you can use var. That's also fine. And so right now, basically, we're just going to repeatedly draw the character from where he is. So what we can do is ctx.beginPath. Always start with this. And then we can draw the player as a circle. So ctx.arc. And we want the radius to be 10. So start at 0 and end at 2 times math.pi. And then we do ctx.fill. And we can also just set the color here to ctx.fill style. And I want my character to just have a simple black color. So that's what I'll do here. And if I reload this page, you can see that our character is at the center of the screen. But right now we can't really do anything, so let's add some key controls. So right now I have this document here just so I can quickly pull this because it takes a long time to type. But what we're going to basically do is we're going to define a variable we're going to call movement, which basically stores what your character is doing. And since we're doing nothing at the beginning, we'll just set it to null. And we're going to detect whether the key is down, so body actually document dot body dot on key down. So basically that's going to detect whenever your keys are held down. And we're just going to define it using a quick arrow function. If you don't know what those are, it's just really just a shorthand way to describe functions. And actually here we're going to make it take in the event prop. And this code here basically just tells it to read 65 key code is A, this is D, this is W, and this is S. So up, down, left, right. And this is basically just going to tell the player to move. And let's just add that in to here. And now if that works properly, you should see that we are able to move our character. So basically what this does is that it stores where it stores what key you've pressed down, stores it in the movement, and at each interval it's going to read the movement of the player and add or subtract the player speed to it. So basically it moves. And just to make sure that the code isn't buggy, we're also going to do document.body.on key up. And here we're basically just going to reset the movement whenever we are not pressing any keys at all. So just movement equals null again. So here you're going to see that once I lift my hands off the keyboard, you stop moving. Okay, so that's the player. And now let's also just, give it some tags. So we want it to shoot an arrow every time that you click somewhere on the canvas. So we're going to do canvas dot on click, and we're going to pass it the event again. And here, this is basically just going to take where your mouse is, take the coordinates of where your mouse is, and it's going to calculate the direction for you, the direction of where your mouse click is as compared to your character. And this is just arctan in 2D, and that's just basically just going to give you an angle, an angle based on two distances that you give it. And here we're just going to also quickly create an array of projectiles. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to, let me just check. Yeah, so we're basically just going to push a new arrow object into our list of projectiles. So projectiles dot push, and that's going to say new arrow. So we're basically going to get an instance of that class, and it's going to be an object, and we want to start at player dot x and player dot y, so just so that it generates at the position of the player, and we're also going to give it the direction. And if you realize that before, by giving it the direction, it also just automatically calculates how fast it's supposed to move in the up, down, and left, right directions. So if we just save this, you can see that, oh, we didn't draw the arrow yet, right? So we're just going to really draw the arrow really fast by looping through all the projectiles with a for loop. So let I equal 0 when I is less than the length of the array of projectiles, I plus plus. And here, basically what we're going to do is just going to say, if I have it here, not yet. So we're just going to say define const proj equals projectiles, ith element of the projectiles, just so it's easier to type in later on. And here we can just copy the code, and for the purposes of this, it's basically just drawing out the arrow in the direction that it's supposed to face, because it's pretty hard using all this math, and I don't want to, think about it in the workshop, so I just had it prepared at the side. Wait a second. Oh, right, and actually before we get this arrow to move, we're just going to define a move function in here as well. And basically what we're going to get this move function to do is just add to the position whenever it is prompted to. And here we're just going to call that move function. So projectile.move. And now you should be seeing that we are able to fire off these little arrow things. And just to make this just make it run better, we're going to say every time that this runs, we're going to take time off the projectile lifetime, and if the lifetime of the projectile is less than or equal to 0, we're just going to take this projectile out of the array, and we're going to do that by saying projectiles.splice, and beginning from this projectile in particular, we're going to splice off 1. And basically that's just going to kill any projectile that is past its timer. And say we want to make this projectile, you know, like brown because it's an arrow. We can just do context.stroke style equals brown. And that is going to change the color of your arrows. And last but not least, we also want to be, you know, creating some enemies. So got some code prepared here. We're just going to loop through, as we did with projectiles, our enemies with the same for loop method. And except instead of using projectiles, we're going to say enemies. Now that doesn't mean anything for now, but we can define an array of enemies right here. And right now that's not going to change anything, but this basically just calculates what direction the enemy should be moving in. And in the same light, we're basically just going to say, you know, we're just going to draw this enemy. So if it's going to be looking similar to the player, we can just copy that code from the player and then just change all the variables that we will be passing it. So instead of player.x, we're going to do enemy.x. Instead of making it black, we'll make it red, just so you can tell the difference. But right now, there's not any enemies on the screen, so we can just say, for here, we can just do enemies.push new enemy and give it 0, 0. And you see that's going to create an enemy that follows you around. And because we only did push once, it's only going to generate one enemy, but you can easily imagine procedurally generating enemies with JavaScript. So right now it doesn't have a lot of interactions with the projectiles that can't actually kill the enemy. So let's code that functionality into it. So for every enemy, we're going to loop through all the projectiles. And if you think about it, the radius of the enemy can basically serve as its hitbox. So any projectile that is within a certain distance of the enemy will be counted as hitting the enemy. And we can just do that here. So if we say const.proj equals projectiles, it's just the same here, so it's easier to calculate later on. And say if, now this is going to be pretty calculation heavy. If you know Pythagoras, you're going to realize that this is basically that. So math.square root of the projectile x position minus the enemy x position, and to the power of 2 plus the distance in terms of y, and basically that's going to calculate the actual distance between the projectile and the enemy. And if that happens, we're going to take off numbers from the enemy health. That's a little weird. Oh, we're missing that. And if the enemy.health, if the enemy's health is less than or equal to 0, we're going to delete the enemy the same way that we deleted the arrow. Yep, and also instead of using I here, we use J, so make sure to change that as well. So splice off the enemy, and of course we don't want the projectile to stay there after it has rammed into the enemy, so we're going to use that same technique and splice the projectile from the array. So basically it's going to take it out of the array. And if we reload this page, something's not working. All right, we forgot to define the condition. So if it's within 10, which is the radius of the enemy, it's going to take health off the enemy and also delete the arrow. So you can see now that this works. And so that'll be the end of our example. And let's go into the challenges. So for the advanced web dev challenge, basically what you're going to do is build your own project with the HTML canvas. So you can either continue the game, add to your personal site, you can build another game or simulation, or you just make a cool design snippet like the matrix effect I showed you in the beginning. So with these dynamically generated graphics, it's really up to your imagination to make what you want. The possibilities are completely endless. And as always, the submission details will be posted on the servers. And if you want to learn more about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you can check out W3 Schools for more information, or you can check out the MDN documentation on JavaScript. And also don't be afraid to Google things or go to Stack Overflow just to get, that little piece of code that you really didn't want to code by yourself. And I just want to make sure that you continue your journey with web dev because it's truly a very interesting subject and it's really fun to code. And before I say goodbye, I would just like to remind you to stay curious.